Thank you for inviting me to speak this morning on navigating the green horizon, looking at the directions for responsible tourism after COP29 and in the context of the EU anti-greenwashing initiatives. I've pre-recorded this in order to make sure that I got it done in the timescale. I've been allocated between 20 and 25 minutes. The video will be available almost immediately, and I'm going to go through 22 slides fairly quickly to give you an overview of the problem as I see it before the panel discussion, which is due to follow. The least said about COP29, the better, probably. The process just about survived, although there was a walkout by some of the countries. It seems that the COP climate process is no longer fit for purpose. It's not going to deal with the scale of the challenge that we confront. The first mention of tourism really was at COP26 3 years ago, when there was a declaration, essentially a declaration of intent. In Baku, there was for the first time a tourism day, and 52 countries and 8 non-state actors endorsed a proposal for enhanced climate action in tourism, effectively another declaration of intent. The WTTC came out with a report which in their press release they described as revealing a significant decrease in travel and tourism's carbon emissions footprint. What they mean by that is that the intensity of carbon emissions is reducing or has reduced, as you can see in the green line on the graph to the right. It is not the same thing as an actual reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions. Essentially, it's a plea for business as usual, and aviation is scheduled to expand significantly over the next decades, increasing its contribution to global warming. Let me begin by explaining where I come to on this. I come from a responsible tourism perspective, which means that there's a strong emphasis on transparency, on reporting what's done, why, in terms of the inputs, the outputs, the outcomes, and the impacts. And I was very much reminded of this when in 2018 I was being asked whether people should or should not go to Cape Town for WTM Africa because of the acute water shortage. And I thought, well, the obvious thing to do is to discover which hotels use the smallest amount of water consumption per bed night and then book accordingly. That information is not available. And that for me is at the heart of the problem of certification. It's opaque, it's unenforceable, and it actually communicates very little. The consumer doesn't really know what the story is. Now, I agree with the chair of the Environment Agency in the UK that greenwashing does threaten our future. It is it's way more serious than just mis-selling. If we fail to identify and address greenwashing, it makes it more likely that we won't realise the deception until it's too late. So I start this by saying transparency and avoiding mis-selling, because if we mis-sell, the deception makes us think it's safe to go on doing what we're doing when it isn't. So the Responsible Tourism Charter, signed in 2022, I picked the photograph of the chief exec of the World Sustainable Hospitality Alliance there, signing it on Magna Carta Island in 2022. You can get a copy and have a look. There isn't time here to talk about it, except to say that one of the most important things about responsible tourism is it helps people to understand the local history and culture and the social and environmental issues, but also that it provides a story, an experience, so that people understand what it is that they've experienced and why it's important, and that makes for meaningful memories. It's a meaningful connection. The problems with certification are clearly stated. I stated them in 2017 on a blog on World Travel Market's Global Hub. It's opaque. There's a plethora of schemes. It's process driven rather than telling us what's actually been achieved. One size does not fit all. I often tell the story. My sister lives in North Wales. They have a big problem with water. They have flooding. I live in East Kent. We have a big problem with water. We're water scarce. So one size doesn't fit all. The priorities vary even within a small country like England. And I can't recover any damages from a hotel which fails to deliver the promises implied by the label. So there's no real financial incentive for me to complain or for the hotel to comply with with the principles endorsed for it in its label. So greenwashing is a big challenge, and one of the problems I think is that more and more people have had the same experiences that I have of checking into a hotel, going up to refine the room, the thermostat set way too low, all the lights are on, TV is on and a bit of card stuck in the key card light switch. Every time that happens, damage is done to certification. And the same happens when, as in the last 3 hotels I've stayed in, all of which were certified, I put my towels back on the rail and there are new towels the following morning. I have no effective redress against that. And effectively what's happening is a levelling down, and we'll see it shortly in the market research that Booking.com do each year. So certification fails to take account of local conditions. There are too many schemes. It's opaque. It cannot be enforced. It's process rather than results driven, and too often it's evidently breached. I hoped when Booking.com brought in and encouraged hotels and accommodation providers to list their green credentials that it would be a game changer, because we'd see people taking action against the hotels and demanding redress. In fact, that didn't happen. Too often the promises are breached, but there is no financial recompense available to me as the consumer. And of course, we're all storytellers. So I tell the story about what happens to me in hotels, and other people do too, all of which reduces faith in the system. Those pieces of cards stuck in the key card on the wall are a real giveaway of the lack of sincerity and compliance which you see in so many certified hotels when you visit them. So ideally what I'd like to see is transparent reporting, where people take responsibility, they explain what they're doing and why they chose to do those things, and then explain and demonstrate the impact of their having taken responsibility. It's about telling the story, engaging colleagues and guests. Reporting doesn't really do that. It could do it. We could have Certification Plus, and we are seeing some movements perhaps to a more rigorous system with science-based targets. But there are 2 initiatives recently which have really excited me. One was Weaver, which unfortunately has been terminated, but it has been taken over by Travelist, and perhaps it will be brought back. I'll talk shortly about My Green Butler, which has developed a new approach to reporting in a verifiable way the environmental performance of green hotels. These are 2 exciting initiatives. Weaver closed apparently because it was too ahead of the game, too soon into the marketplace and not being picked up enough by potential members. My Green Butler's initiative with Chris Warren is still chugging along and hopefully will take off. I also wanted to remind us about the Google Travel Impact Model, which has so far been applied to aviation. There are efforts underway to do something similar for accommodation. I think this is exciting because it does provide travellers with a transparent way to easily understand and compare travel options, no matter where they book their travel. It needs, of course, to be trusted, accurate and reliable, and undoubtedly the Google Travel Impact Model for aviation is currently the best available. What's also interesting, if you look at this particular sample, which I put together on the slide, is that actually the most carbon efficient is also the cheapest. Worth bearing that in mind if you haven't got the information. Why sustainability is the successor or the development from My Green Butler, developed by the Green Butler initiative. This provides live reporting showcasing in real time, transparently and independently verified the sustainability progress being made in a hotel. This will be really exciting if the industry is ready to take it forward and if this kind of evidence is regarded as acceptable under the Green Claims Directive of the European Union. Now, to come to the market trends, 74% of the people answering Booking.com's survey in 2023 said that they wanted to travel. They want travel companies to offer more sustainable travel choices. That's up from 66% in 2022. So clearly that's growing. 51% on average, you can see it's much higher for Thailand and much lower in the Netherlands. 51% believe there are not enough sustainable travel options. 44% of travellers, people responding to Booking.com's survey, said they don't know where to find more sustainable options. There's a clue there. We need to find ways of making it more obvious to travellers that a particular option is sustainable and sustainable in a way that's meaningful to them. So consumer demand has changed. This is data from 2021, showing that almost half still believe that there aren't enough sustainable travel options available, and 53% admitting that they get annoyed if somewhere they're staying stops them from being as sustainable as they are at home, for example, by using recycling facilities. Expedia's Sustainable Travel Survey in 2022 found that consumers want to see lessening environmental impacts, support for local economies, supporting local culture and communities, and to visit lesser known destinations. Whether that will be possible depends upon how the market responds. So in terms of certification, there is a problem because transparency is the core responsible tourism principle. And we see that in the Responsible Tourism Awards, where people do say what they're doing and they tell us why, and they transparently report the impacts. But the problem is that current certification schemes lack meaning, they don't communicate, there's no story, and they fail to engage with consumers. As a result of that, they're opaque, they're unenforceable, and they communicate very little. Largely, I would argue that they are failing. We could imagine a new form of certification which was transparent, enforceable, and meaningful. Perhaps one day I will be able to challenge a hotel which hasn't fulfilled what it says on its certificate. But at the moment, they would simply say, well, we didn't give us that certificate. That's the certification company. And of course, I don't have a contract with the certification company, so I can hardly go after them for compensation for having missold me the product. We don't know yet, of course, precisely how the EU Green Claims Directive will shape up. It's possible that failure to meet the standards you're claiming in your certification would amount to mis-selling and could be actionable, but we don't know yet. So to turn then to the EU's position on all of this, and that really brings us to the Green Deal. And what's the objective of the legislation that we are increasingly concerned about, we being the travel and tourism industry? I think there are two parts to this which are really important, and we're only going to talk about the first one today. The Green Claims Directive is essentially about consumer protection, and it could be understood as empowering consumers to make more informed decisions about how, where they travel. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact at the same time, going through the legislative process across the European Union, is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD, which applies to companies with 500 plus employees. And within that, the European Sustainable Reporting Standards are being developed. They will cover environmental matters, just like the Green Claims Directive, but they also cover social matters like the treatment of employees, human rights, anti-corruption, and diversity on company boards. Now, we've already begun to see corporates requiring reporting down their supply chain, including SMMEs. So this is going to have an impact on the way that you are able, as an SMME, to conduct your business relationship and your contractual relationship with those businesses in the tourism industry that you sell into as a supplier. I think this is a major concern for the future, but today's focus is on the Green Claims Directive. The most recent briefing was published by the European Parliament in October, just last month. And it's on the Green Claims Directive. It's very explicit there. This is about protecting consumers from greenwashing. And the reason for it is pretty obvious, really. There's a lot of greenwashing about. A European Commission survey in 2020 found that 53% of the environmental claims they looked at were either vague, misleading, or unfounded, and 40% were completely unsubstantiated. In 2020, the EU decided that consumers needed to be better protected against information that is not true or presented in a confusing or misleading way to give inaccurate impression of the product or the enterprise. Greenwashing. That has led to the Green Claims Directive. Now, it's hard to dissent from the view that something needs to be done about greenwashing. And the Green Claims Directive is an attempt to do just that. It would require companies to substantiate the voluntary green claims that they make in business to consumer commercial practices by requiring that they meet a number of specific requirements. We'll look at those in a minute. The new directive prohibits making a generic environmental claim for which the company is not able to demonstrate a recognised, and the wording here is really important, I think, recognised excellent environmental performance relevant to the claim. So that more specific rules on environmental claims follow from that. Now you can see from the graphic at the bottom that we're now on our way through that process. We're now at the trilogue process before the second reading and adoption of this. If you want to look at all this in detail, I put the link there for you. Now this document is 19 pages long and we can't go through all of it, but I wanted to just pick out a few of what seemed to me to be the really critical things in terms of substantiating these explicit environmental claims. You've got to be able to base your claim on widely recognized scientific evidence. You've got to take a life cycle perspective. You've got to worry about your waste. You've got to be able to demonstrate that this is more than the legal minimum. It's got to be above the legal minimum to claim credit for it. That's surely not unreasonable. It's got to be significantly better than common practice. And you've got to report on greenhouse gas emissions and your offsets in a transparent way. These will be a really big step forward when they're introduced. One of the challenges, I think, though, is that the proposed directive does not prescribe a single method for the assessment. In the consultation process, SME United has put forward its view that SMEs could be affected indirectly through market pressure or consumers who suspect they don't comply with the obligations. And they've called for the introduction of a simplified EU-level tool by facilitating life cycle analysis. Otherwise, there's a risk, they say, that the directive could lead to a situation where only financially strong market players, big companies, are able to use green claims. So SME United is calling for a simple, workable and proportionate set of substantiation criteria. Now, that would be difficult enough, but we need to remember that this is a directive and it will have to be implemented through national legislation in each of the nation states of the European Union. So diversity is almost inevitable. But let's be cheerful at the end. Wouldn't it be amazing if certificates were awarded for achieving an acceptable level of water and energy consumption per bed night, for paying decent wages above the minimum wage levels, and for meeting minimum labour standards? We need to know what the business has achieved that makes them worthy of certification. And we need to know how they compare with others. And then, if I was travelling to a European destination which had water scarcity, I would be able to find out which hotel used the least water per bed night and make my choices accordingly. Then certification would carry real meaning. Thank you for listening. I put the link to the recording, which is available online, below. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.